Hey guys, welcome to the channel. As you see in the thumbnail, what if Issei becomes a guardian of all girls part 1. Before I start, please do support for more awesome content and subscribe my channel and like this video, and also go support the DanzyDanz for writing that awesome fanfic. Let's start this video. Issei hiatus was simply put a legend. A figure to look up to and an inspiration to all with a modest background. A simple boy raised in a simple and loving family who climbed his way through ranks of adventurers through hard work and sheer will. From a mere rookie barely able to fend himself with a short sword, taking small quests from his fellow smallfolk, to a worldwide renowned legend who was bestowed a sacred gear, a gift from the gods. Respected by fellow experienced adventurers, idolized by kids and fledgling adventurers who had just picked up their swords, dreamt by girls ranging from a common house servant to a princess of a rich country. He was brave. Very brave. But he was not stupid. His mind wasn't as sharp as the Grand Magus, Mephistopheles, but to claim Issei hiatus was all brawn, and no brains would be downright mistaken. Should a battle be no longer winnable, completely devoid of hope, he will sound the retreat and live to fight another day, crushing those who failed to slay him. There is a fine line between bravery and stupidity, Issei knew so. Not rarely an honorable knight or anyone self-righteous enough to see themselves as one called him a coward. He didn't particularly mind. He still lived while those honor-crazed had become no more than reanimated rotting corpses deep in the dungeon. Forever cursed to guard the rumored endless treasures until another adventurer comes and lays them to a final rest. Unlike most other dungeons, this one had no name. No fancy two words mixed into one for a name. Not the Blackwood Dungeon, not the Everfull Dungeon, not the Dungeon of Doom, only the dungeon. A place filled with living horrors and monsters that could eradicate an entire city, chock full of traps varying from pitfalls to acid rain. From everyday zombies or goblins that were practically the bread and butter for a party of bronze-ranked adventurers, to a fearsome elemental dragon whose breath could melt a city, and to the feared apocalyptic beast itself, Issei, the beast of the apocalypse, harbinger of death, devourer of life, and so on and on. Hundreds had been dispatched into the dungeon. A crusade to quell the primeval once and for all. Hundreds entered, none returned. The dungeon remained untouched for many years to come, until one day, the wielder of the Red Dragon Emperor himself, the world's champion, the chosen of mankind, lover of breasts, took upon the noble task. Humans, angels, devils, fallen angels, the Norse, the Olympians, and people of various races all supported him and his great party, believing that he was truly the chosen one to finally rid the world of the primeval evil. The human who would put an end to their ceaseless worry of the apocalypse. Many paraded his march into the mouth of the dungeon. Dismissing its grim stench, everyone cheered his name, lauded him, prayed and wished for his success. All girls and women hoped for his well-being, yearning that they would see their adored champion once again. All legendary Orichalcum and Mithril ranked S and SS rank respectively adventurers followed him to fight alongside him until the last draw of their breath, determined to put the evil beast down once and for all. The people who had never learned how to swing a sword or cast a simple fireball spell remained at the entrance, assembling a massive camp guarded by soldiers of various factions, camping for their hero's triumphant return. They waited and waited. Hours became a day, and days became a week, and weeks became a month. Months became years. Nobody left at the mouth of the dungeon. The heroes never returned. Along with their champion, their hope died. But you're not dead. Issei sighed drearily. He was really into his storytelling too. I know that, but that's how it goes. That's the legend that people believed in. Well, the legend sucks. The young girl with the ardent scarlet hair stuck out her tongue in a display of audacity, aimed at none other than her one and only guardian. Tell something happier. This brat. If he was any younger and heedless, Issei would have expressed himself verbally. An entire year had passed and she was still equally annoying since the first time they met. Or rather, when he killed her last guardian. Not a recollection he was fond of. He always frowned when he remembered that day. That day, or maybe night, his belief that he had slain the beast, the primeval of all things that existed, shattered completely. The idea that he had saved the world was thrown down on his feet and stomped until it was dead. Why? Issei remembered the rasped breath. The beast's enormous figure coated in hot red scales, drenched in his own blood, futilely lying down next to him, miraculously alive. What wrong have I done? Nothing yet. He had told him. God, he was such a righteous prick. But I can't have you bringing the apocalypse or whatever as you like. Don't know when, don't know why, but I stopped it anyway. He victoriously grinned as the adventurers behind him cheered. It had been a long, torturous fight. They had suffered massively. Around 100 of the strongest adventurers traveled with him from the start, 20 remained when he entered the final chamber to fell Issei, and now, only 4 remained including him. 2 mages, a knight and him. The champion. The apocalypse. Issei spoke with confusion. But it was my duty to prevent one. Issei didn't know if a Issei could shed a tear. Hell, he doubted nobody ever knew. No one in the 7th hells or the 7th heavens probably knew. But the beast shed a tear. Maybe it was crocodile tears, an attempt to strike his chords, begging for his pity, but regardless of what it was, he did. The fearsome beast of the apocalypse wept by his feet. "Don't joke around," he said to the presumed beast. Completely dumbstruck. "You're Trahixa, you can't." "Trahixa?" The ancient being looked painfully confused. "Boy, that vile beast was long gone decades ago, slain by Yahweh and other gods. Its soul is kept in that stone." Idly, he turned around to see the center of the large cave. There lay a small podium, and floating atop of it was a black gemstone. It was such a small orb, not bigger than a loaf of bread. "The soul stone," he had said to him. "My whole life devoted to guarding that wretched stone protected that girl, so the beast shall never rise. It was my sole purpose of being, and I am slain due to your lack of understanding." Issei remembered his resolve faltering at that. Oh, it was faltering quickly. As quick as ice in summer heat. It felt like it just dropped into a gaping pit, never to be recovered. Through his life, he had learned who to believe and who to pretend to believe in. Issei hoped the big dragon would fall into the latter, but he trusted him. He remembered his last remaining followers weren't listening. They were shouting at him, yelling that the Trahixa was only tricking him. But Trahixa, he silenced them with a glare. "Fools. What benefit do I gain by lying? I'm dying regardless of what I say." His entire body was covered in slashes. Some were burned, horribly. Huge chunk of flesh was missing on his torso, blown out by the champion's explosion. The longhorn at the edge of his snout was broken, and his yellow eyes were losing their light. "Who sent you here, boy? What cruel vindictive soul told you those lies?" Issei recalled seeing the pain in his eyes as he told him everything. That all factions on Earth had cooperated to kill him, when all he had done was to prevent their demise, mistaking every adventurer as enemy as they mistook him as the primeval. It must have been one hell of an unpleasant feeling, being labeled the primeval, despised by everyone because of some baseless lies, and now dying without receiving gratitude for his deeds in protecting the world's existence. He remembered feeling ridden by guilt. Felt like an idiot. The glorified puppet champion of mankind. Perhaps if he had waited. If he told his party to stay first before instantly attacking him, unleashing torrents of spells and their various weapon techniques, perhaps all of this misunderstanding could be avoided. Their death would be avoided. Great Red's death would be avoided. "You're mulling again, partner." "Ah." Behind him, his last remaining companion snorted a puff of air that lifted him off his rock seat. Issei landed on the red dirt with an audible oof. "Fuck's sake, Drake, how many times do I have to tell you, it's not funny. Land is flat and flat hurts my ass." "Why, Drake Gotch?" The Red Dragon Emperor himself. He was only about a half of his real size, but all of his features were the same, only downsold. The same brilliant crimson scale, same draconic emerald green eyes, and the very same annoying guttural laughter. Just smaller and not as noisy. Still, not less annoying. He must have exited his soul when he was being gloomy. "Drakey." Triss leapt into the sky with a gust of her misty black wings. Wings he had never seen before in his life until he met her. He still had no idea what the girl containing a part of the beast's soul had for wings, or if it was ever named or discovered before. He wondered if they're called Trihexanian. Trihex, perhaps. Features of a dragon were referred to as draconic, so maybe Trihexanic. He had zero clue. He just knew it looked ghostly. More like wispy tendrils rather than wings. He watched her red hair flutter as she gently landed on Drake's scaly forehead, as she then ranted about how boring his story was just to miff him. Normally, Issei would bicker back at her. But he didn't this time. Too busy brooding at the moment as Great Red's withering voice echoed. "My watch has ended. Boy, you're unlike any of these fools you listen to." Maybe Issei was too disordered at the time, but he believed the dragon smiled at him. "Swear to this old dragon that you will protect her. Her and the soul stone, but her most importantly, else the whole world is doomed. Protect her? Who are you talking about?" His serpent-like yellow eyes trailed to a small cavern. "Trihixa's soul is too powerful to be completely destroyed and too powerful to be contained in one soul stone. There's more. 6 of them in here is one." The red dragon coughed, spewing an excessive amount of blood from his huge maw. "Ani as well as the only seal if she dies, and those soul stones have been gathered, Trihixa will rise." Issei stole a subtle glance at Triss. She wasn't much different than she was back then. He recalled seeing her peering from her hiding place, hiding behind a wall of red rock, visibly terrified. Her hands were shivering and her body trembled as tears dripped down the tip of her chin. Her scarlet red hair was noticeable even in the dark cavern. At first, no one noticed her. They were still cheering without him. But Motohama, he saw her. Never missed a spot, that glassed magus. He saw her and roused the rest of the party to attack her. A girl who had done nothing. He remembered, clearly, that the red dragon tried to stop them. He tried firing a classic dragonic fire breath, only to let out his blood and hacked pitifully. It was a difficult moment with so little time. He tried stopping them, reasoning with them, yelled an order. He had done everything to give him some more time. Are you crazy? We've gone this far and you're going to turn on us. Which side are you on? That beast or us? Your friends. Instead they branded him a traitor. His own best friend by all people. It was difficult hearing them scream. Especially when it was him who ripped their scream off their throat. He didn't kill them right then, he couldn't. They had descended floors and floors, brotherly bonds had been made, they had lost brothers and sisters in their journey. They had won and laughed. They had lost and wept. And now he had to fight them at the very end. He was given a choice. Return to his old life without ever looking back to this day, or prevent the apocalypse. That time, the world's champion knew there would be no turning back whichever choice he made. They were equally exhausted, and if it wasn't for Drake's minor regeneration ability, he might have been the one who died. But he lived. Issei lived and executed those who had been his followers since the first step he took towards the dungeon with his very hands. His crimson armor protected him from Motohama's flame spell that had turned people to cinders, and his armor allowed him to catch Mitsuda's sword, gripping it tight as he plunged his sword through the knight's chest. Come on man, let's just get this over with, we've won, Ice. Why are we still fighting? Just end it. I'll forget everything that has happened here, just look at that beast. He's dying. You can't save him. You just have to kill her and we'll head outside. We'll be heroes and get our rewards. The ladies are waiting, Ice. He could never forget Mitsuda's disappointed smile when he stabbed his heart with Ascalon. It had to be done. No one there believed in the red dragon but him. Letting anyone live meant a moment waiting to happen. He didn't have time to grieve. Rather, he didn't give himself the time. Chris was staring at him that time, half shocked and disbelieving, half confusion as she tried to grasp his actions. Him and 3 others must have been the few ones who had managed to get to the deepest floor of the dungeon. She looked like a child witnessing a murder, like an innocent soul discovering that evil does exist in the world for the first time, that the world she thought she knew wasn't a beautiful place without taint, all while her only father figure was dying in front of her. Issei recalled, he was going to speak to her, to offer solace, but the girl retreated inside a cave. He could hear quiet sobbing as he headed back to the red dragon. And Issei was filled with nothing but remorse and fury. Alright, big guy. I just killed my friends. My 2 best fucking friends. He spat. His rage was hardly constrained. If Ascalon was any ordinary sword, its hilt would have been crushed under his grip. You better not lie or I'll fucking skin you and her alive, starting with the girl. It was probably the first time he realized the champion of mankind was not the ideal hero who never cursed or made cruel threats, but the dragon still nodded. I swear. A dragon never breaks his words. I thank you, Red Dragon Emperor. Issei was seething his teeth. Issei. My name's Issei. Hi do Issei. I do Issei, Japan-born land of the rising sun, very well. Hi do Issei, I, Great Red, will be eternally grateful for your devotion and dreadfully regretful for your losses. He could imagine Drake stumbling on his feet. Great Red. Great Red grinned ironically as he rested his eyes. Not so great now, am I? He then chuckled. The chuckle was so weak that he barely heard it. In here at the end of my time I pass my duty to you, Hi do Issei. Then Great Red died. Burying his body was a great hassle, but Drake never once complained about having to dig the earth with his claws. He had to transform into his true form to push Great Red to the grave and spent a few more minutes burying him. Even so, he never once complained. The dragon was an admirer of Great Red, so he said, and it was the first time Issei saw him cry too. He didn't know dragons could cry until that day, where 2 dragons cried in front of him. The funeral was, well, depressing. Nearly the entire resident of the dungeon came by, minus the zombies, since they couldn't think of anything but brains, and most minor monsters at the top floors, such as goblins and the slimes. Even the father of wolves, Fenrir, was present. It was then he realized they knew. The monsters knew about Great Red and knew he was simply doing his duty. They were there to serve under him. This cavern had never been so filled. And hot. There must have been at least 50 fire spirits crying tears of flame, several low-tier dragons breathed fire in honor of the Great One. One thing he realized was that they didn't attack him. They all bowed to him as if he was some sort of their god, groveling in a way their body could. Some god. I am murdering their friends and family. It wasn't until Fenrir himself approached him and spoke to him without moving his mouth. You, Issei Haidu, is the last guardian, keeper of the dungeon, this world's last bastion of hope. We will serve you until the end of our time. Until the end of our time. The legion of monsters followed as if it was a chant. Dragons, wolves, minotaurs, centaurs, all the ores. All the pixies. All the black skeletons and black orcs. All the elementals and succubi. There was no animosity towards him. They bore no grudge for their fallen companions he had slain. They cared not that they had to kneel to a human who had believed in false truth. To think monsters could do more than what humans could, he was pretty sure all of his hackles rose, just like they did just now. Ending his recollection, the former champion sighed deeply as he lied on his back. He was only wearing his tunic and, honestly, he couldn't care if it was dirtied. He could get a new one sooner or later. And it seemed it would be sooner rather than later, as a pillar of white light appeared at the edge of his vision. A big bad wolf with grayish-blue mane materialized and faint haze-like mists coated his furs. Fenrir. Issei acknowledged his arrival as he got up to his feet, dusting off the dust off his clothes and his brown hair. He had cut off the 2 short locks of hair sticking out behind his head. A goblin once yanked one of them during his earlier days when he was an inexperienced steel-ranked lowlife. It nearly cost him his life. He had never let his hair touch his shoulders since then. "What's up? More rookies?" "Apparently so." The gray and blue wolf growled. "My pack scouted a band with a devil. From her clothes, she seems like a noble. Their dog tags are gold. 6 members. Mostly females. 1 devil and 1 of mixed breed. The rest are humans. Gold ranked and mostly female." Issei grimaced. He hated having to deal with female adventurers. He had hurt and killed a woman before since they were enemies, he just felt it didn't sit right with him. But what needed to be done needed to be done. As for the rank, it was the 4th out of 8, from steel, bronze, silver, gold, emerald, platinum, orichalcum, and lastly, mithril. The SS rank for short, where only less than a dozen had ever attained it. His old rank. Without needing to be asked, Fenrir continued. They've cleared about 10 floors in less than 2 hours, taking out at least 100 goblins and skeletons. And they've slain Rieger. Issei couldn't hold back his sight. A warden gone. The dungeon was becoming weaker and weaker by every ambitious adventurer that walked in. "We've secured his body," the wolf assured me. The most that could be done to their fallen minotaur was to burn his body. Nonetheless, there will be time for grief. Not now. They're camping on the 11th floor, possibly for half an hour. Could be less. "What do you want us to do, boss?" It was a bit weird hearing the word boss from a creature of Norse legend, but Issei got used to it. That horse. He'll be raring to have a go because who wouldn't try for revenge when their brother was slain? "Tell them to wait for me by the 11th stairs and tell those guarding the 11th floor to leave them be. They're C-ranked. Brute force can only get so far against a proper party." "Aye. Right away." As Fenrir disappeared in a ray of light, Issei grabbed a small pack latched on his belt. After it was taken off, the small pack then expanded to the size of a standard backpack. His hand reached inside, and soon enough, a set of black-tinted armor clanked and tumbled as he carelessly threw them on the ground, still looking for the helmet. The noob-proof armor as he named it. Normally used against those ranked gold and below. It offered decent protection without raising any unneeded suspicions. Meanwhile, Triss had ditched the Crimson Dragon, approaching him with a sullen and worried look on her face. "You're leaving, huh?" Glancing up, Issei chuckled. She was a brat, but he knew she cared for him. In her own bratty way. "Yeah." He replied casually, sliding down his feet inside the steel armor, quietly cursing why armor had to be a pain in the ass to wear. "You still have it around. Nothing will hurt her, partner." Despite this, Triss was not amused. Her pout didn't fail to form as she clutched his arms, looking at him with her mean red eyes and a small frown. "You're forbidden to die. Like I want to." Issei laughed. 5 years ago, he would have been a flustered mess. As a young woman who bore a part of Trihixa's soul, Triss was beautiful and not less. A set of crimson eyes with a beastly look, healthily voluptuous, with breathtaking long flowing hair that reminded him of the season of autumn. Even her spiraling horns looked more like a pair of hair ornaments adoring her hair. Had he been any younger and dumber and had the time, he would kill to get a woman like her. Well, perhaps no killing for a girl was a bit extreme. He was her last guardian now. His first priority was her safety. Next. Boobs, probably. Luckily, the Succubi were never short on that peculiar area. If not for their services, his sanity might have slipped long ago from having to work without play. Well then Issei took a deep breath as he wore his full face helmet, hiding his brown eyes in its shadow. Snow-white light began to gather beneath his feet as he bade his temporary goodbye. "I'll be off. Be good." "There he goes again." Triss sighed melancholically. For a year, nobody had gone past the 10th floor. Her guardian and his wardens had always taken care of them without fail. Still, no matter how many times he had succeeded, no matter if he was the champion of mankind or whatever titles people laugh at him, she worried for him. "I could care this much for a person who slain my father no less, or who I thought was my father, anyway." Without warning, Drake puffed in air, tumbling her down like he did to his partner earlier. Triss was not amused. "Bdraig. Is this the all somber day? Yeah, all keep being somber and such. Isn't this cavern dim enough?" The dragon guffawed, his laughter echoing around the cavern's walls while Triss kept her glare at him. "Either way, he's gone for at least an hour or so. Shall we?" Still on her butt, Triss then showed a fearless look as she pushed herself off the ground. "You'll pay for that." Black flames blazed by her palms, flaring chaotic energies. She might be the one to be protected, but she didn't want that. She wanted to be able to protect herself. She had witnessed how powerless she was a year ago when she could only stare and watch, and she refused to be a damsel in distress like those princesses in Drake's stories. She wanted to be of help. She had only one goal in the pretty head of hers, to be able to fight alongside her guardian. Flames of the campfire danced in her eyes. Its genial warmth embalmed her group of 6, cleansing their fatigue. A moment of respite after their last couple of action-filled goblin slashing, skeleton purifying hours since they had taken the challenge of the dungeon. Ria's Grimoire had been ordered to set camp in a large hallway. Threats will either come from their left or right, which they would be able to see and react accordingly. As her party members rested, several eating the rations, most of them doing nothing but relaxing, Ria's idly shifted her head towards the dark corridor lying ahead. As a devil, she could see better in the dark than most races, but in a place where there was no source of light. Her racial gift didn't help much, sadly. She couldn't see far into the abyss cloaking the dungeon, unable to see that one wolf had been sitting in the dark, watching them. Their quest and expedition so far had been no less than satisfactory. 10 floors they had descended with minimal injuries that nothing her healer couldn't handle. Even her holy maiden had gotten used to the miasma of the rotting fleshes and scattered human remains. Goblins, skeletons, more bones. Is that all this dungeon has now? Grumbling with a frustrated tone would be her party's vanguard, Zenobia Quarta, at the moment grouchily poking the campfire with a stick. Where are the elites? The black orcs, the skeleton king, anything that isn't green-skinned or will crumble after a hit. I saw some slime somewhere up there. Zenobia frowned at her fellow frontliner. Slimes. Slimes. Kiba, they're jellies. Even Asia can handle that much. Not expecting to be dragged, the holy maiden could only stutter her words. I don't think I can, I'm sorry. Hearing that, Zenobia sighed as she patted her back as a gesture of support. You're too kind-hearted for your own good. Can't be helped, I guess. Ooh, Ria smiled as her healer blushed. Meeting a person with a golden heart like Asia was truly a rare occurrence. Someone that never judged who you are, where you came from, whatever your race or past. It brought her relief knowing that people like her still exist, somewhere around the vast world. Like a breath of fresh air amidst the corruption. Slimes are monsters, still. Kiba set up, always the gadfly of the group, this man. Zenobia's eyes returned to its fierce state as she glared at the swordsman, once again taking the bait. Those jellies aren't worth half their trouble. Well, that's rather discriminatory. They're still monsters. Zenobia groaned loudly while Kiba simply smiled, chalking one up to his scoreboard. Goblins and skeletons hardly offered much contest, true. In fact, they were the weakest monsters found here. A group of unwary adventurers could be fatally injured, annihilated even, and who could tell what would be done to their bodies afterwards, before they would be left to rot. However, her party consisted of no such inexperienced amateurs. They had taken numerous quests and had proven themselves to be renowned in their region. She did have a head start since she was of noble blood, but Ria's too had persevered from the bronze rank, the second lowest rank for an adventurer. She still had to climb the ladder. Regardless, she found it hard to believe that the very dungeon that consumed the life of the world's champion would be this easy and cheaply guarded too. The most difficult monster they faced was the Minotaur from the previous floor, and even then, they came out relatively unharmed, all thanks to her strategies and her party's skill and deference. The plan wouldn't work if they didn't follow it through. But then again, there is still that possibility. Maybe the champion killed them already. The petite-statured fighter chimed in while nibbling her roasted fish on a stick. He did bring nearly all of the adventurers with him. They must have gotten deeper. Riaz muttered, officially joining the conversation. It is very possible they've slain most of the monsters here during their time, but leaving us with the leftovers to deal with. Zenobia grouched. No wonder people never come here anymore. The pity their dark-haired companion said with her soft tone. Blue sparks of electricity pranced between her delicate fingers as she smiled. I've been very limited with my options of punishment lately. While most of the group felt an uncomfortable chill including Kiba, Riaz sighed. Loudly. Priestess of Thunder, torturer of thunder more like. She pitied the Minotaur guarding the last floor. If it had been a person, she would have at least spared him the suffering and ended it swiftly. But a monster is a monster, and the only good kind of monster is the dead ones. An already dead monster wasn't worth spending her magical reserves. As a leader, aside from leadership, she had to be pragmatic. Akeno seemed to have another opinion regarding magic efficiency, however, it was a good thing she had lots in reserve due to her fallen angel bloodline. Essentially, her fingers played with the tip of her hat on her lap, the trademark apparel of almost all sorceresses. They didn't help much aside from being an accessory and to prevent unwanted liquid landing on top of her crimson hair, but it was made from comfy material. And Riaz thought it was cute too. No matter how it is, Riaz continued the discussion, I doubt it'll be this easy. We wouldn't have to be here searching for him if it is. Don't forget that 4 groups of adventurers have come to this place out of their curiosity. mostly steel, but some of them were ranked bronze. Bronze ranked parties shouldn't be troubled much by skeletons or goblins unless they were surrounded. They should have returned with most of their parties intact. But they didn't. For all I know, they might have been turned into one of the skeletons here. She raised her gaze, looking at all her party members that now gave their undivided attention to her. The silver ranked party came to this dungeon a week ago before we did. Only one rank below us, yet from their 7 members, there's only 2 survivors. A fighter and a ranger. The fighter lost an arm and died not long after they arrived at the village due to blood loss, and the ranger refused to speak to anyone. Only today he finally did, saying that his party's leader is still in here. A knight. The same knight we're tasked to find. The dungeon might not be as horrifying as it once was, but it's never truly safe. Never will be until the beast is defeated. The line separating life and death here is very thin. A slip up and that's a line crossed, a line that even the champion has crossed. She hated to kill the jovial heir, but as their leader, she had to make sure her group never forgot that they were facing death here. We're here not to kill monsters, but to retrieve the missing knight and return him. Remain on guard and let us prepare and get this quest done and head back safely. Agreed. Yes. Rhea smiled, seeing the fire of determination burning in their eyes. If determination alone can light this dungeon, she wouldn't have to cast any illumination spell. Break. By the keeper's request, the wardens had gathered in a large dark room that would otherwise be pitch black if not for the lights from the flock of fire wisps. They shone like fireflies, looking like a flying lit candle minus the candle. A species of a monster he once thought was a neutral since they never attacked him when he was an adventurer. Who knew these tiny fiery sprites could have allegiance? My scouts confirmed the devil is indeed their leader. The one with red hair. What she is still remains a mystery, but it's likely she's a sorceress or the like, basing from her robe. Fenrir told the group via convenient telepathy. Issei had always wondered if this calm and oddly smooth voice belonged to him. His roguish appearance could give a different impression. Don't judge the book by its cover, he supposed. He supposed that applied to this unarmored devil girl. The mixed breed is a fallen angel and human. Fenrir continued, she mainly casts spells from the lore of thunder, but my scouts reported she has purified skeletons using divination spells. My guess is that she's a priestess. The remainders are 2 human swordsmen and a woman, a human priest, and a Fenrir paused. The pause so sudden that some monsters grew noticeably tense from the suspense. Ieri forgot what her race is called. There echoed a loud groan of disappointment. She's not a beastkin, Fenrir continued hurriedly, but she does share similarities. Their species originated from your country's folklore, boss. One I'd thought you ought to be familiar with. Issei thought for a few seconds. Imkai. Aye. Fenrir grinned as if he was the one who answered. She is a Imkai. But Imkai. Issei raised his brow, which was well hidden by his helmet, including the rest of his face and body. Having a Imkai in a party of humans was not a common occasion. Their people were rather secluded back then, and having one in a party was considered an achievement in itself. That, or they were slaves. But he supposed many things could change in a year. What kind? One of my pack mates mentioned he thought of her as a cat. Perhaps one similar to a feline. Fenrir muttered, scrunching his nose in disgust. The Papa Wolf hates cats, Issei supposed. She's a close combatant, fighting with her fists. Petite and agile. Landed a hit on one of my scouts before he fled. Feline. Either a Nekomata or the worst of its species is variation, a Nekashu. Though, if her method of fighting was any indication, it seemed to him she was just a Nekomata. Nekashus tend to use their unique yujutsu in most cases, preferring to fight in a distance akin to a mage, but still had the ability to hold a close combat fight. If she was nothing more than a Nekomata, he wouldn't have to worry about her too much. Alright. Issei nodded at the father of wolves. His usual quiet gesture of appreciation towards anyone since he first picked up his wooden training sword. 6 people, 1 devil and 1 fallen angel half-breed. Who is a priestess? His helmet pointed at one of the monster's commanders. Have your goblins tried separating them? Ah, boys tried, boss. The orc warlord grunted, his voice heavy like his build and his big damn axe. They didn't try enough. Idiots, as Grimber Jonsbane roared into laughter, the small group snickered. The skeleton king's hollow laugh echoed eerily throughout the empty jaded room. His voice cut through the laughter. What about your skeletons? Any luck? Roughly the same. The skeleton king grumbled, the green ember in his eye sockets dimming. My warriors met their end through purification or reduced to ashes, and the archers can't hit them. They can conjure a barrier. Sorceresses and their cunning cowardice. Cowards. Chuckling lightly, Issei allowed the 2 company leaders rivet in their mirth. Low-tier monsters such as goblins and the low-tier undead weren't much of a loss. They were the bulk of the first bastion, the first line of defense of the dungeon, spanning from the 1st floor to the 15th. But had those been the black orcs that were slain or the skeletal dragon, neither of them would be laughing. Which was why they should prevent these adventurers from slaying the already endangered units. He and his band of misfits had wiped almost every elite monsters in the dungeon, one of which being the world serpent, Midgardsorm something damned Norse, and their tongue-twisting names. Nonetheless, the casualties he and his band of heroes caused never recovered. Most elites were dead, and the second bastion and third were critically crippled in strength. Same could be said for the first bastion as well. Goblins require time to breed and mature and need basic training on how to wield a club, and even more time to grow into a hobgoblin and ultimately an orc or an ogre. Skeletons couldn't reanimate the instant they fell, and less so when they were purified, since there was nothing left to animate. That said, many high-ranked adventurers also died that day. He supposed that was the reason why visitors were rare. He often wondered what his parents were thinking about their son right now. Would they be proud if they knew? Well, he knew they would. They were his parents and they believed in him. He just hoped he hadn't disappointed them. Enough of that whimsical thinking. Alright. I see Issei muttering. I'm guessing they've only faced a meat shield so far. A rough term. Harsh, even. But not a term foreign for these monsters that they had to express disgust for that term. Aye. Asterian's burning skull nodded. Goblins, skeletons. A few zombies. Slimes that somehow crept to the surface. Lek, Slimmers. Useless. Grimber grouched, growling his menacing Orcish growl. They killed 5 of me. Let me send Jarkle and let him butcher him. Then a loud huff erupted, like the sound of a raging bull. They killed my little brother. Tortured him as if he was a toy. They spared him no dignity. The Minotaur seethed in barely restrained fury. Steam shot out from his nostrils, and his dark eyes brimmed with rage as the humanoid bull looked at Issei. Let me avenge his death. I'll gore them all. I swear by Rieger's name, I will gore them all. Easy now, you'll have your turn, Taurus. Issei spoke calmly. He appreciated the fervor, but Minotaur's short temper had been the bane of their existence. Too often they had died because of their uncontrolled rage. I'm sorry for your brother. We'll have time to mourn, but later, not now. Keep being like this and you'll die the same way your brother did. Adventurers know you have a limited fuse, and it's likely they used it against your brother. The Minotaur puffed loudly. And it's unfortunate, but we have to postpone your revenge a little. Remember that we severely lack manpower, Taurus. And a healer, on top of all. The succubi are barely good nurses. To be fair, they specialized in other forms of nursing. And right now, I see 6 potential additions to this dungeon. If we have a better healer, your brother might have been saved. The muscles on his arms bulged as he gripped his battle axe tighter. Minotaurs were not a creature to be insulted without causing a loss of limbs or head, but after a moment of time and a long exhale of breath, Taurus eased down. Whatever your call, master. Good lad. Issei nodded. This is the 5th group this year. Fenrir's voice invaded their minds. Do you propose they will be any different? Not a single person believed me. But 1 or 2 of them were killed before we were able to talk. Issei shot a meaningful glance at a particular skeleton king and a particular orc warlord who looked away and pretended they were enthralled by the fire wisps. Sometimes, they both tend to forget that not everyone was like the champion and could withstand a direct blow to their head. Issei sighed. Anyway, this group can either be the same adventure-seeking adventurers who come here just for the sake of it, or they can be the one who accepted a quest from our last visitors and is confident that they can complete it. If that's the case, then they're better prepared. Hopefully have some sense in their head to negotiate instead of attacking back and dying senselessly. That's why I'd like to have a chance with them. Don't kill any one of them, but we'll try to capture 1 or 2 as our hostage and gain bargaining power. Is that clear? Aye boss. Clear as it can be. No killing. Issei nodded. That means you as well, Taurus. The bull puffed. I got it. I won't fail you. Then all was silent as the keeper considered their strategy. The group seemingly breathed again all at once when Issei suddenly spoke. 2 swordsmen, are they armored? The male has arm guards and shin guards. Fenrir said, and already both the orc warlord and the skeleton king laughed mockingly. No armor, bah. Are their skin made of steel? Even steel won't save them from a cleave of my sword. And my axe. Grimber shouted eagerly. Fenrir waited until the 2 had their share of fun before he continued the briefing. The female doesn't wear anything but a weird combat suit. A bit similar to a swimsuit. I see. Issei nodded. Wait, how do you know what a swimsuit looks like? Well, there's a lake outside where I used to drink, where the lasses and lads swim around. I'm stuck here hiding myself and you get to ogle girls in their swimsuits. Issei eyed the father of wolves with suspicion as Fenrir became visibly nervous. Only he did, since the wardens only had battle and fighting in their brains. Except Asterion maybe. Did he even have a brain in his skull? Regardless, they sacrificed defense for mobility. That's a bit stupid, I guess. Back then, Issei considered it to be a smart choice. Couldn't get hurt if they couldn't hit him, right? And if things went awry, he would be running faster than someone at least, right? It wasn't until he ran out of stamina and received permanent claw marks across his chest he changed his mind. Luckily, they weren't deep. The girls dug it too, so that was a blessing in disguise. But ever since that incident, he was never seen fighting without armor. They will surely protect the devil if she's the leader. This floor's cramped corridors can act as bottlenecks, giving them tactical advantage despite their numbers. We'll need to lure them to this room where you can flock them from all sides. No one argued. Tactically wise, Issei far outclassed them. Asterion, still willing to lend us a few bones. Ha! Of course. Always ready at your command. The Skeleton King yelled proudly, mystical red flame enveloping his skull as he lifted his greatsword to his shoulder with ease. He might have lost some of his muscles and flesh, okay, not some, but all of them, but this bony king would never crumble that easily. Issei sniggered. A simple ask for favor, and his skeletal head was high up in the sky. Silly old bonehead. Tell your skeleton crew to attack them from the rear, drive them here with force. They're experienced and it's a narrow place, so expect heavy losses and hope that they use their swords more rather than spells. Very well. The Skeleton King nodded. What's my part in this? That's it. What? I am this floor's warden and I am to stay idle while those wretched cretins roam my floor. Yes. Issei said flatly. They have a priestess, Asterion. And she's a holy maiden it seems. Picked after the last holy maiden died in this very dungeon. My plans aren't foolproof. Besides, Taurus and Grimgar are here. They'll be your substitutes for the time being. At the same time, Grimgar's goblins will fill the corridors and join the attack when they pass. Make sure they won't circle around. On it, boss. Hey you. Grimgar then turned to his left, towards a goblin that was only a midget compared to his size. You heard him. Send the boys. One empty corridor and I'll bash your skull in. Startled, the goblin scampered outside the room while Grimgar guffawed. Are you doubting my abilities, lad? The Skeleton King fears nothing. Not even purification. Who will take command of the Skeleton Company if their Skeleton King walks into the light? You don't have an heir to take your crown, you know. If you're gone, that's half the force of this place gone. Ah. Asterion spat a spit of fire as he begrudgingly jammed his greatsword into the cold cobblestones. You're too clever with your words and mine, boy. Can't say I like that. I respect you and your plans, but I don't like it. Red is much a simpler keeper, may his soul rest easy. Issei shifted on his feet. They should have held the council where there were chairs. Yeah, I get what you're saying, but I'm not here to repeat his mistakes or make one. The Great Red, as the former keeper of the dungeon, had kept the dungeon well. Fended off pesky adventurers. Hundreds, even. But obviously not enough. The proof was most gold-rank parties could reach the 20th basement floor before they were either killed or retreated. But Issei was different. He might not have the same amount of sagacity of the Great Red or equaled his strength, but he possessed several things the dragon lacked: cunning and size. The Great Red was stuck in that massive cavern located at the very bottom, supervising everything by relying on Fenrir's information and a small crystal ball to keep watch. Issei, on the other hand, didn't have that humongous body. While Great Red had to wait for a new challenger to appear, Issei was able to approach and deliver them the challenge. More to that, he could walk through the dungeon floors without looking. He wasn't a perverted fool who took up the challenge of defeating the beast without any preparations and relying on blind dumb luck. He was the pervert who had traveled every floor, finding and tracing every potential spot for a trap or two. He knew how to distinguish a safe passage and a passage that would lead to an endless chasm or a pit of spikes, or a bit of both. He learned and understood the dungeon like a book he read over and over before committing himself fully to slay the harbinger of apocalypse. And on top of it all, he was a former adventurer himself. He knew how an adventurer's mind works. At least, those who shared the same level of capability like him. Aside from the fact the Great Red chose him himself, Issei had proven himself to these monsters of his skills, both as their enemy and now their ally. For that, he had gained their respect and the obedience needed to ensure the effectiveness of his plans. The evidence? Not a single soul had successfully gone past the 16th floor, and their heads were planted on a spike to act as an effigy for any daring adventurers. It didn't keep all of them at bay and made them rethink their decision of spelunking to the dungeon, but it did hold back some of them. And that's that. Anyone need a rerun? The helmeted young man glanced around. Once, twice. No arguments. Good. With that, he brought up the flanged mace strapped on his belt. It was well smithed, but nothing grandiose. Not worth more than a gold. In fact, it was an ordinary flanged mace once held by a knight that ventured too deep in the dungeon, and so was his armor set. But dead knights need no armor. Unless they were undead. Issei, on the other hand, still had some use for them. They're preparing to advance. Better send your skeletons quickly. Fenrir told them. Being able to see through the eyes of his wolves must be one hell of convenience. I'll leave the rest to all of you. For Red. Issei nodded and adjusted his grip on his mace and shield. And Rieger. Brad and my brother. Taurus readied his large battle axe. A single swing of it could and had decapitated limbs from bodies or heads from necks. Several limbless corpses would testify if they weren't dead. And Grimger. Grahahaha. But the orc warlord's booming laughter, the fire wisp scattered, allowing darkness to envelop the room. The only light being the flames surrounding the skull of the Skeleton King as he and Fenrir teleported away not long after. Thus, his plan commenced. Ark in here. Burn something. Issei's eye flew in the darkness. Just get your goblins to help the skeletons. I so grumbled the orc warlord. Break. Hiring a black blaze, Triss flew away as Drake's fire breath charred the ground she stood on. Her chaotic orb collided with the dragon's scales, yet no damage was dealt to the crimson dragon. Not even a scratch or so much of a scrape as the dusky fumes faded away. Not much of a surprise, really. Mid-flight, Triss readied another spell. Another lump of chaotic energy gathered in her hand, generating an unsteady spherical black orb that violently pulsated and burned the air around it. She bore a grin, but before she could unleash the spell, Drake swatted her with his tail. Triss shrieked, although mostly due to surprise rather than pain. She was caught safely in Drake's giant red palm, as she would have flown to the cavern wall had he not. As the stars swirling around faded, the dragon snickered. Today's lesson is: don't forget what your foes can do. I have a tail, lass. A very long and strong tail. You're still 1,000 years too young to stand a chance before the mighty me, lass. Shaking her head and blinking several times, Triss scowled as she sat up. Obviously. You're as old as an artifact. I'm surprised your scales aren't antiqued yet, brat. Unlike her, his partner, Drake's draconic tongue wasn't as sharp. Wordlessly, the almighty dragon tossed her like someone would to a piece of garbage. Triss merely giggled gleefully as her misty wings helped her land safely. Once she felt her soles on the craggy ground, the young girl looked at the dragon as he shrunk in size. No flashy lights, no fancy magic, no nothing. Just shrunk like a deflating balloon. When he was done deflating, he was only half the dragon he was. What are you looking at? Don't stare. It's rude. Nothing. She said curtly. I'm just wondering how he beats Red. Red's tougher than both of you, right? Drake scratched his chest at the spot where Triss's earlier attack connected. It was a bit itchy. My partner, you mean? No. Your cousin. I don't have a cousin. Triss groaned audibly. How could she forget the Crimson Emperor dragon was a full-time dragon of stupidity? Yes, I meant him. Your partner or whatever. She muttered as she walked around the large cavern, kicking a small pebble around. Back then, I was so scared. That was my first time seeing a fight, you know. I didn't even know that killing existed. He huffed as he lied down. I can't imagine how it feels. Not knowing anything. Horrible. Her crimson eyes fell upon the cave where she once hid. Cowering behind the rock like a terrified lamb while the wolves fought outside. All my life, this is the only place where I have been. Whenever there's a group of adventurers, even the words still tasted odd in her mouth. Coming to this place, Red will send me to my room. No matter what the time, no matter where they are. Listlessly, she gazed at the neatly stacked pile of rocks located near the corner of the grotto. I thought he was angry at me if I knew. Lazily followed her gaze. A tinge of sadness was felt then, as he saw the stack of boulders marking the grave of the once great Red. He was only trying to protect you. I know, Triss sighed, turning away. She didn't like being seen when unhappy. I just wished I knew how to protect myself. I don't want to be a hapless cub my entire life. I want to be able to protect something. Even if you knew, he would never allow you. I know, it's just another sigh. He gave his life while all I did was hide and watch. And now it's the same with him. He's out there fighting while I'm stuck here. I'm stuck here with you too, but I'm not complaining. Triss spun around to send a glare at Drake, who cackled in return. You don't hate my partner, do you? What? That's not. I'm not good at those complicated things. Feelings, or all that jazz. And he didn't feel the need to. He was a dragon. Why would you think that? Oh no. I told you I'm no good at those things. Triss frowned. Why couldn't Fenrir be with them? He had furs while Drake had sturdy hard scales unfit to be laid upon like a bed. And Fenrir wasn't as dumb. What I know, however, is this: it's no use fretting over the past, lassie. What's been done is done. Can't be changed less you're a time traveler. Not like I can change much if I am. Drake puffed. You're broader. He tried cheering her up, and that was how she responded. Exhausted from her exercise, Triss took a seat on the ground, wiping off the sweat gliding down her chin as she glanced at the cavern ceiling. Staring at the stalactites destroyed at the battle that took her guardian's life. And those people, how did he do it? Drake only bothered opening one of his eyes. The people that were fighting with him were his friends, right? His party. Hardy, aye. Drake rested his eyes again, shifting his head to feel more comfortable on his arms. What about them? Triss felt sad. How did he kill them? With his sword. Triss felt annoyed. You're a dumb dragon. Drake snorted. Silence reigned as she mulled over what her guardian had done for her before he took the mantle to become her last guardian. Her heart throbbed as she remembered the way he drove a sword into the heart of that one bald man and how angered he became afterward as he returned to face her guardian. Well, former guardian. He wasn't like me. He has had a life out there, right? People who he cared about. Her voice softened to a whisper, riddled with guilt and sorrow. And those were his friends. Why did he kill them? How could he kill them? For once, Drake thought long as he cultivated an answer. He's no genius, that partner of mine. Drake said to her, he's not the greatest of people either. Lots of knights or bunch of people with shiny armors out there are more chivalrous than him. For all the time I've spent with him, your guardian is more of a pervert rather than a glorious knight. And he's not ashamed of it. Not one bit. Triss rolled her eyes, regretting she ever asked. But yes, he has a family. Parents that I know completely admire him. He's adored by the people despite his minor setback. He has enemies, yes, but they respect him as a rival, begrudgingly as they were. He's crowned the world's champion, but never once he claims he's a champion or anything less or more. He doesn't forget who he was when he began, as a simple boy who wanted to do the right thing. He doesn't want to be a hero, he does what he thinks is right. Drake remembered. Back then, it was fighting Trihixa. Who he didn't know was the Great Red instead. Now, it's to keep you and this world safe and stop Trihixa from being reborn. Triss blinked in astonishment. This grand dragon had always been carefree, stolid, merry. She had never heard him speak with such fervor before. You respect him. He is my partner. He responded straightforwardly as it was a fact. It might not be my place to say this, but as his partner, you ought to be wise and make sure he and Great Red don't give up those things for nothing. Triss hugged herself. Was it all because of her? I know. It's why I want to train. Train and be strong like him. If I can protect myself better. You still know nothing, Tristania Lindis. Drake sighed. All this time and still she hadn't changed. The red-haired girl made an offended look. What's that supposed to mean? Why did you call me with my full name? It means what it is supposed to mean. Drake breathed as he let out a mighty yawn. Time for a quick nap. Get some rest, lass. He'll be back when or before you wake up. Don't try to be sneaky now, I might be sleeping, but I'll always know. She groaned. Everybody else seemed to know more than her. Even the slimes. Flying towards a small exit at the back of the cavern, Triss retreated to her room. She stared down the hallway lit by torches on the walls. It was long and filled with many corridors. Each corridor would have a door leading to a room. Rooms that were once filled by the wardens. A warden for each floor from the 1st to the 40th, the last floor that was the dungeon's end. Now, only 3 wardens for each 15 floors. 7 in total. Too many empty rooms filled with memories of the cheers and laughter and the merry singing of the monsters after a successful day, or a reverie for the fallen. Now the halls were hollow and devoid of songs. Opening a door nearby, she was greeted with the sight of several wooden furniture crafted by the dwarves and a bed made by pelts of wolves and sheep. Some of it might even be one of Fenrir's wolves. Wolves who were slain and died in their line of duty. Great Red had shielded her from the truth to keep her from hurt, but finding the truth on her own hurt more. Too many lives had gone all for her sake, lives she could never return. Through his lie, she had to learn what loss meant. Worry slipped in her mind as she thought of her guardian. She wished to never understand how losing him would feel. Triss sprawled on the bed, quietly asking for forgiveness for enjoying these furs perhaps a bit too much. But they were soft. Warm. They welcomed her fingers as they sank. The scent was flowery, perhaps rose, perhaps tulips. She wouldn't know, she had never seen any flowers other than those 2 that the succubi brought. As she lied on her side, Triss stared blankly at the dark cavern walls and the small lantern hanging there before closing her eyes and hummed. A requiem for the departed. Remembering those who once shared their laughter and told her stories. And as a prayer for the safety of her guardian. Break, they're close. Issei could hear the bones clanking against the cold cobblestone floor. Accompanying its tune was the grisly sound of steel shredding through goblins' flesh and muscles, added with several war cries or shrieks of the goblins, alongside the fervent yelling and spell names and commands being shouted. The adventurers seemed to be moving smoothly despite the chaos. Those poor skeletons and goblins barely stood a chance. Non-existent perhaps. It would need a miracle or a massive amount of bodies and skeletons to tire them out, but even as a meat shield, Issei couldn't sacrifice too much, and he didn't believe in miracles. There was nothing else that could be done. Their casualties couldn't be avoided. They'll be here soon. Issei muttered as he brought up his steel shield, reeling back his focus on the task. On my way. Aye boss. I'll be gentle. With one muscular and green hand, Grimgr lifted the armored man. They waited, counting the seconds as the fire wisps watched anxiously, hiding behind the pillars. The flash of blue light seeped through the gaps of the wooden door separating them and the adventurers. The footsteps loudened, and the fighting came closer. Now, the orcs chose their leader by power, and Grimgr had justified why he was chosen as theirs. With a swing, he sent the keeper flying. Riaz turned her head to the source of a loud crash, which was the resulting noise of an armored man smashing through the wooden double door, effectively breaking it beyond repair. The armor flew several more feet before a wall stopped his flight, then it slid down into a pile of bones as they rattled. Her eyes widened with realization that the figure could be their missing person. "You. Hang in there." Riaz shouted to inform the rest. "Udo, Zenobia, stay in the rear and switch with Kaneko if you need time. It won't be long now, we might have found him." "Yes." Kiba, Zenobia, and Kaneko yelled all together, battling against the horde of monsters and skeletons, plowing them down with terrifying finesse and power, while Kaneko remained behind them, crushing the head of those who managed to slip past the edge of their swords. Zenobia's blue-bladed greatsword swept low, chopping off several goblin heads and turning a few skeleton warriors into crawlers. They kept clawing at her until she crushed their skull with another swing. Kiba couldn't hit as many targets in one swing like her, but his speed made up for it. Dodging and weaving and striking when the opportunity arose, the blonde knight took care of a mixed group of 10 monsters on his own. "You three. Clear space." Riaz yelled, and the vanguards gave birth as torrent of demonic energy blitzed between them, incinerating through the monsters. The now scorched skeletons couldn't speak and simply tried to move closer before their bones turned brittle and crumbled. The goblins, however, screeched in agony as their flesh melted to the bones. Enough was enough. Their morale had been wiped out and their fighting strength waned. They're running away." Kiba cheered as he wiped a splatter of goblin blood off his pretty face. He then smiled refreshingly at his fellow sword user, exchanging compliments and all of that pleasantries. "I got 22. Zenobia said proudly, heaving her breath, smiling. "How many did you two get? I didn't know we kept count." Kaneko shrugged as she nonchalantly brushed a chunk of flesh off her arm. "About 17 or so." Kiba admitted, and the girl's smile grew wider with pride. "That's why you should learn how to wield a bigger sword." Kiba smiled. "Oh, it's never about the size, Zenobia, it's how you use it." "Well, I used it better than you did anyway. Great work everyone." The devil cheered, proud of her group as she viewed the gory dungeon, filled with charred goblin corpses and ashes. Once again coming out unharmed against such odds. But there was no time for celebration as she hurried the group to help the fallen knight. They rushed to him, with Zenobia on the front and Kiba and Kaneko watching their back in case the monsters tried to have another go. "Are you alright?" Riaz crouched by the fallen warrior. He was a human, she knew. Her devil senses rarely lied to her. He groaned in response, moving ever so slightly among the pile of bones. "Hang in there." She turned to her healer. "Asia." Asia nodded and quickly went to his side, casting a healing spell on his chest, just as Grimber Junsbane let out a colossal roar. It came from the center of the room ahead of them as the fire wisp swirled around him, granting him an enviable sinister effect. "Come dead meats. Come face Grimber Junsbane and die trying." Ha 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 ha. If that didn't take their attention, nothing will. "On your position. Now." Alerted by the warlord's presence, the vanguards took their place with Akeno and Riaz behind them, both ready to cast their spell while guarding Asia. Grimgir Jonsbane, the warlord, Riaz quietly whispered as she stared down the heavily armored orc, whose size doubled the size of a black orc, who was double the size of a normal orc, who was double the size of a regular man. That thing had the same size as 16 humans and still outpowered them. Thinking fast, she assessed the situation. They had just survived a wave of skeletons and goblins, and it was too soon to commit themselves for another fight. Kaneko stays with Asia while she heals him. Zenobia, you have to distract him or even beat him if possible, double team with Kiba. Conserve your energy. Akeno, ready your spell. If it can't kill him, it might paralyze him long enough. Kiba and Zenobia nodded. MFU, I thought you'd never say that. The priestess's face was enlightened by the blue thunder crackling between her palms. Smiling a wicked smile that admittedly sent chills down the warlord's spine. But fear never latched permanently on Grimgir Jonsbane's green skin. Too afraid to stand there and watch puny meatbags had no courage. Riaz considered the chance it was a trap, but orcs and plans never really shared a common ground. "Oh. We'll cover you." The swordsman and swordswoman marched into the dimly lit room, approaching the broken double doors, sword in tight grip and eyes of steel. While all attention was drawn to the orc warlord and his sad taunts, Asia watched in confusion as the man she was supposed to be healing had risen to his feet. Are you okay, sir? Please sit down if you're still hurt." He glanced down at her and gave her a quiet nod. She smiled cutely, even as a metallic fist was driven to her chin, knocking her out in an instant. "Sorry. Had to." Issei caught the blonde girl before she could fall and alerted the others of his heinous act of betrayal. Not a betrayal if he wasn't on their side in the first place, but they surely had other opinions on that. With their medic gone, the next concern would be the leader. Better and her party to bow down, and therefore, an open door for negotiation. A blow with his mace should suffice. She didn't look like the strong, resilient type that could withstand a blow to the head. But as he was about to sneak behind her, the shortest girl of their party turned around as if she sensed him. Her eyes widened at the fainted girl in his arms. Traitor. Welp. There went his chances. So much for easy picking. The crimson-haired sorceress and the Thunder Priestess turned around. She looked horrified when she saw her healer. What did you do to her? His boulders chimed as he shrugged, keeping his arm around the girl's neck. Move, and I'll break her neck. They all gritted their teeth. It sucked to be their bad guy, but this bad guy needed to do it if he wanted to keep the world intact. Inside the room, Zenobia was busy leaping out from the swing of Grimger's axe. She had parried it once, but her arms shook from his insane power. She dodged another slash by ducking underneath. She brandished her greatsword horizontally, only for it to create a loud clang as it met the orc warlord's armor. Rahahaha. But the downward swing, Grimber caused a crater in the floor as Zenobia had leapt out of the way. She wasn't the fastest, but she was faster than him. However, one hit from the giant axe, and she would be a dead swordswoman. Behind her, Kiba was distracted by the commotion behind him. When he turned his head away from the fight, a minotaur emerged from the shadows and rammed him. Hard. Kiba's scream was drowned by Taurus's powerful roar and his thundering hooves as the bull hurled him to a pillar. The air in his lungs was ripped out from his throat. Pain seemed to shred his back open, and his face was punched by the floor as he fell, knocking him out cold. The Minotaur's roar took her attention off the fight, and horror twisted her face once she saw her partner lying on the ground, not moving. "You fight with me?" Groy. Grimber swung down his axe that made her greatsword look like a needle. Zenobia managed to bring up her blade and supported it by placing a palm on its flat end, but the orc warlord's brute force was inhuman. He pushed her down to a kneel, and as her arms trembled from the pressure, Grimber swung his offhand and delivered a brutal punch to her side. Ahaya. Durandal, her greatsword, slipped off her grip, and Zenobia screamed in pain as the floor grazed against her face and side, tearing her combat suit and scraping her skin. Her fighting spirit hadn't died yet, but her entire body was trembling from the pain. Her right side felt hot due to the scrapes, and she felt a few ribs were broken by that single punch. As she struggled to pick herself up, clutching her side, the warlord had towered before her. He had the edge of his black axe pointed at her face, and he grinned mockingly with his unkempt yellow teeth and a fang that reached his scarred eye. She noticed the Minotaur did the same to her fallen companion. The realization dawned on her like a numbing truth. They had lost. Seeing the success of the wardens, Issei smiled smugly. For he was smug when things went according to his plan. "It's over." He finally spoke to the remainder of the adventurers. He noted the priestess still had her thunder spell ready in her hands, and the sorceress herself looked no less angered with a very dangerous black orb flying on her palm. A spell from the lore of devils, he supposed. Magics were never his forte. The small brawler even had her fists raised and coated in white aura. Senjutsu? Issei thought. Not that the ability mattered now. You've lost. Look at your friends. Your healer's in my hand and your two swordsmen beaten. Those brutes can swing their axes faster than you can fire your spells at me, not to mention and can twist her neck like a twig. Her look of defiance was rather stimulating. Damn him and his gratifications of sadism. Her body too. Sorceresses always had that stimulating air, especially with their low neckline wizard robe. The priestess wasn't much different either. Even with that expression and her traditional white robe covered in goblin blood, these women certainly were beautiful. God damn it, Issei, focus, you damn pervert. Before silence took over for too long that it became awkward silence instead, Issei continued. Cast out your spells, lower your weapon. Listen to me, and this girl can do her job. Healing her friends, that is. You're with the monsters. If I wasn't, would your friends be alive? Both Grimber and Taurus snarled in the room. Grimber kept his axe just about to nick Zenovia's unprotected neck, while Kiba was carried by Taurus on his shoulder like a sack of potatoes. The Minotaur made sure everyone knew a twist was all he needed to turn the night into a gory mess. Rhea swallowed. This man had to be one of Trahixa's servants. How can we trust you? Are your friends being alive not enough? His helmet made a small metallic noise as Issei slanted his head. Do you have any other choices? Her tone was that of defeat as the malevolent orb faded into nothing. Don't harm them. We surrender. Her two remaining party members looked at her in shock, but realized there really wasn't much of an option. The brawler lowered her fists, cancelling out her wide aura, while the priestess irately sent her spell to the empty hallway. Blue thunder blasted through the hall, and a loud rumble was then heard as the dungeon walls crumbled. I apologize, she smiled with just her lips. I can't cast my spell. They're too unstable at times. Issei ignored that veiled threat or show of power. He didn't spare them to keep them as enemies. Good to hear. I'll have to keep those two and this girl as hostages though. They won't get hurt and they'll be fed. Your healer included. When she's no longer knocked out, she can heal them. Rhea felt his stare beneath the helmet, staring deep into her eyes. She tried to read him, wondering what kind of man lied under that normal armor. As long as you listen, that is. Their fists were shaking. To be defeated and having to comply with an enemy she failed them as their leader. The least she could do was keep them alive as long as she could. Or provide them with a swift death before she took her life. I accept. Issei wasted no time. Those swordsmen and women might suffer internal damage. Grimger, Taurus, bring those two to the infirmary. Get one wolf in there and have two of your black orcs on guard. Righto boss. Understood, master. Before she vanished with the two giants vanished in bright white light, Zenobia managed to look at her leader. Her expression was nothing but remorseful. Ria's I'm sore. Ria's bit her lower lip. She had failed her. She had failed them all. Not that great of a first impression, I admit. Issei said, earning their look of disbelief. They must have thought he was mocking them. Ria's eyed him. Wondering what kind of demon is hiding behind that armor. Why did you kill those who came here before? They didn't listen. He replied, not feeling much remorse. The casualties were so needless that if only they had listened, Motohama and Mitsuda would still be alive. They might even be standing next to him instead of being buried. I have this gut feeling that you will understand better than they did. Understand what? That you have defeated us. Issei had forgotten that too many questions irked him. The monsters never quarreled with him more than needed. Not even Dreg. Maybe Triss, but she was a special exception. Understand why you and your party are still alive instead of being sent to the surface limb by limb. Issei warned. He might be friendly, but they still need to remember they were still his captives. And understand why I'm doing all of this. Riaz took careful note of the warning, reminding herself about crossing the line. But why did you kill them? And to even do such barbaric thing to their body. I never said it wasn't barbaric. But even that needs to be done. Issei said calmly. I'll explain everything later. Answer whatever questions you have. Then, you can decide whether to believe me or not. And if, by chance, we don't believe you still. Well, he looked at her as lights gathered under their feet, alarming them for a few seconds until they realized it was a teleportation spell. Then I guess you're all dead after all. Thanks for watching this video. Part 1 is over. If you really enjoy this video, like, subscribe, and comment down below, and turn on that bell notification. Don't forget to support the DanzyDanz for writing that awesome fanfic. See you in the next video. Goodbye.